Hello everyone, welcome back to Autognizant channel. First of all, I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for such an overwhelming response. We have 200 plus subscribers within a week and that's really awesome. Once again, thank you very much. Today we are going to discuss about automation framework. What does it mean and what are the benefits of implementing test automation framework? And also we will be discussing about what are the best practices that one should follow while developing a test automation framework. Without further ado, let's dive straight into it. The real meaning of automation framework. As I mentioned earlier, today we are going to discuss about framework, automation framework, and what are the types of automation framework, why do we need automation framework, and what are the characteristics of good automation framework. First of all, what is framework? A framework is a platform that provides a foundation for developing software applications. Generally, it is a shared, reusable, common functions that is used to develop software components across organizations. Coming to automation framework, it is a collection of reusable common functions working together to support automated testing of any applications. The concept is exactly same. We want to reduce the script creation time and script maintenance time. What are the types of automation framework? So we have three major types of automation framework: data-driven framework, keyword-driven framework, and hybrid framework. Let's understand each one of them one by one. Let's understand data-driven framework first. In data-driven framework, we test the scenarios against different sets of data. And generally, the test data is stored in Excel sheets or CSV files, or sometimes even in database, depending on the requirement. So if we look at the diagram, we can see there is a driver script which accepts a data file and which executes the automation scripts against each data set in the data file. And later it compares actual output with expected output and writes the test results in the output file. Now let us understand keyword-driven framework. Here, automation scripts are written in Excel sheets with the help of keyword. And keywords are predefined words like navigate to an application, click, send keys, and select element from drop-down. If we look at the diagram, there is a driver script. In this driver script, there is already code written for each predefined keyword. Now, when we execute the driver script, it reads each and every record and keyword from the Excel sheet, and the code behind these keywords gets executed against the application under test. And later, it compares the actual output data with the expected data. So the advantage of keyword-driven framework is we don't have to write any code. Right? Everything is already written behind these keywords. And the disadvantage of this keyword-driven framework is that we don't have any control over our automation scripts. If our test scripts are failing, we cannot debug them because our scripts are all written in the Excel sheet. So there is no way for us to debug and rectify our test scripts. We need to reach out to the developers to fix if there are any issues. Coming to hybrid framework. So hybrid framework is combination of data-driven framework and keyword-driven framework. So here we are trying to combine both the frameworks and remove the limitations of both the frameworks. So here you can see in the diagram, AC Core framework is a hybrid framework which is built on top of Selenium, Java, Cucumber, and Maven. And I have also mentioned core components of the Autognizant framework. There is an Autognizant driver, Autognizant config, there is also core config, then Selenium, Cucumber, we have object repository, logger, key generator, and there are some utility classes as well, such as Excel utils, DB utils, and this framework is communicating with the application under test. So here we have AC core framework is a separate project and AC example project is a different project. We can call it as a test project. So in the test project, we can see we have to write our test scenarios in feature files in the form of scenarios. And we have to write step definition classes for each step we define in the scenario. Later, we need to prepare object repository, and we also need to prepare page object model classes for each web page in the application. We also need to provide our configuration files and test data. So we have included AC Core Framework library in example project. Now we can see this is when we execute AC example project, it uses the reusable common functions from the AC Core Framework. And after the execution, we get the log file for the automation execution, and we also receive the HTML report once the execution gets completed. So here, how are we solving the limitations of keyword-driven framework and data-driven framework? So here we have created our wrapper class called Autognizant driver. So we don't have to write the entire Selenium code for each Selenium actions, right? So there are methods available in the Autognizant driver. These methods are just like keywords. So that's how we integrated keyword-driven approach in our framework. And when we talk about data-driven framework, we have a test data folder. In the test data folder, we can create Excel sheets having test data prepared for the scenarios. We have combined data-driven framework. We have a test data folder. In this folder, we can create multiple spreadsheets and we can keep our test data there. And there is a provision in the framework which using which we can provide this test data to the test scripts, and test scripts can be executed against different data sets in the data file. Let us now understand why do we need automation framework. First of all, if we talk about Selenium, Selenium only automates browser. That's it. So we need to figure out a way how we can execute our automation test scripts, how we can report the automation execution result, right? How many test cases are passed, how many test cases are failed, along with proper screenshot. So for all those things, we need an automation framework which can handle all these things. It also ensures that reusability of the code, right? We don't have to rewrite the same code again and again, right? And it also helps us reducing maintenance cost, right? So lots of maintenance cost is involved when we talk about the maintenance of automation test scripts. Sometimes there could be new controls added on a web page. Sometimes entirely new page gets added into the flow, right? If we follow the page object model pattern, we can reduce lots of maintenance cost. And there is 100% accuracy with automation, right? If there is a single verification mismatch, automation test script reports the failure. So these are the basic advantages of automation framework. And if we automate test scripts, we can execute them in any stages of software testing life cycle. So far, we have seen main types of automation framework and why do we need automation framework. Now is the time to understand characteristics of good automation framework. And this is very, very important. Otherwise, we will end up having a framework which is difficult to maintain and using which it will be very hard to write test script. So first point is wrapper functions for Selenium actions. So when we write Selenium code, we have to first create driver object, then we have to identify element, and we have to wait for visibility of that element, and then we can perform action on that element. So there is a couple of lines involved in this process, and we don't want to write the same code for identifying element, for performing wait operation on that element, and then performing the actual operation on that element, right? So we will create a wrapper function to perform all these actions, and we will use these wrapper functions in our actual test script. Okay, if we do not have wrapper function, then we will end up creating lots of Selenium code, and going forward it will be difficult to maintain that code. So we must have wrapper functions available in our framework for Selenium actions. The second point is isolated object repository to store locator detail. When I say isolated, it means that the locator details should be kept separately, and those locator details should not be mentioned in the page object model classes. So what are the advantages of keeping object repository isolated? So if any locator details change, we no need to go inside a test script and modify our test scripts, right? We can just go to object repository file and update the locator details there. That is one advantage. With the help of object repository, we can give meaningful name to our locators and web elements, and we will use them in our test script. So our test scripts will become more readable, right? If we keep on writing the XPaths and CSS selectors inside our test scripts, it will be difficult to read our test script, and it will be difficult to understand the functionality that we are automating by looking at this test script. So with the help of object repository, we can give meaningful name to each web element, and these web element names we will be using in our test script, so that we will be able to see nice readable scripts, and these names will also appear in the logs and reports. So even for a non-technical person, they will be able to understand the test scripts as well as the automation execution results. The third point is dynamic XPath handling. Automation framework should support dynamic XPath handling. So what does it mean? So when we look at web applications, it may contain grids and web tables. In those tables, the data keeps changing, right? And we want to click on a particular record for edit action or for delete action. Then we need to write dynamic XPaths, and each automation execution, the data gets changed, right? And we need to identify those elements dynamically with changing text. So there should be a mechanism provided in automation framework to identify dynamic XPath. Along with this, it should handle stale element exception automatically. Many times I have observed when we perform some action on a web element, it refreshes the certain section of a web page, and the DOM document object model gets reloaded automatically. But once we have already found out an element with the Selenium, and if we try to reuse the same element, then we may get stale element reference exception, right? If we receive such exception, we need to again find out that element using Selenium. So this mechanism should be automatically handled in the framework. The next point is page object model design pattern for script creation. The page object model design pattern simply means that we need to create separate Java classes for each web page. In those pages, we will be creating the methods for performing operations on that particular page. So for example, let us say we have login page. So we will have a separate Java class for handling operations on login page. If we land on home page, we will have a separate homepage class for handling operations on homepage. So in this way, if we create Java classes and in the methods inside those classes, it will be very easy to maintain the changes. Right? If there are changes on a login page, we will just go to login page class and modify a script. If there are changes on login page, we can go to login page and modify a specific method that has changes, right? It will save lots of maintenance time, and we don't need to go to each test script and modify the code there, because we will be creating objects of these page classes and using them in our test scripts. So when we object page object model pattern, it avoids modification in each test script. Automation framework should be able to provide external test data from Excel sheets to test scripts. So if I have some scenarios which I want to execute against different data sets, so there should be a mechanism in a framework which will read all the test data from Excel sheets and provide it to the test scripts for execution. We should be able to see the automation execution results for each record in a test data file. It should also handle Selenium weights properly. So what I mean by that is, we don't need to write wait statements again and again, right? So when we perform any operation on any web element, it should automatically wait for visibility of that element and then perform the action, so that we can reduce the number of lines of code for waiting for an element. It should also support localization testing for multilingual application. What I mean by this is, nowadays we have many applications which support multiple languages, right? We can go and change language from English to Dutch to Hindi, or sometimes in Marathi. So if you change the language, the labels, the messages, the error messages, everything gets changed, right? So if we prepare test scripts for English language, those scripts will not work for other languages. So this is called localization testing. So we don't want to write new test scripts for other language, right? If we select language Hindi, then we will have to write new test scripts for Hindi language. The scripts which we created for English language will not work. So that's not a good idea. So we should have a provision in automation framework so that we can execute the same script against different languages. The automation framework should also support TestNG or Cucumber test management and execution tools. With the help of these tools, we manage our test scripts, and we can report our test execution results. It should support database validations. Sometimes we might need to verify records in a database after performing web operations. So there should be an utility which will interact with the database and perform validations on the database. We might need to execute automation test scripts against different browsers and different operating systems. Sometimes we might need to execute on Chrome browser. Sometimes we might need to execute on Internet Explorer or Edge browser, right? So there should be a way in which we can control the test execution parameters, and we should be able to execute automation test scripts on desired browser, desired operating systems, and in desired environment. And it should also support real and headless browser execution. So the real browser means the browsers which we open and see on the screen, and headless browsers means it's running in the background. So we will not be able to see any user interface in headless execution. So The automation framework should support real and headless browser execution. It should also support cross-browser testing. It means that we should be capable enough to execute our test scripts on different browsers and different operating systems. The automation framework should be capable of executing regression suits in parallel mode. So if we have huge regression suits, that will take a long time to complete if we execute sequentially. So the framework should support parallel execution of multiple test scripts locally or remotely on Selenium grade. And it should also capture the screenshot whenever any test method fails or whenever any test step fails, and it should automatically attach them in execution report. I have seen some framework wherein we have to capture the screenshot separately, and those will not be part of your report. So if we want to, it is very difficult to analyze those reports, right? For failed test cases, we need to go to other folder and check the screenshot from there. So it's always better to have the test report, screenshots, and logs in a single report. The next point is automation execution logs. The automation framework should automatically generate automation execution logs for each test run. These automation execution logs will be helpful in analyzing the failures. And if it is a genuine application failure, it will also help us providing the test data which was used during that execution. And this has to be done without writing any additional log statement in the test script. So it should be handled in a framework itself. Last but not the least, it should also generate nice HTML or PDF reports after the execution. So according to me, these are the characteristics of good automation framework. This is not the end. You might have different thoughts or different ideas about automation framework. So I request all of you to share your thoughts about good automation framework in the comments below. In the upcoming video, I am planning to create project structure of example project, and I will be explaining the integration of the automation framework into example project. And the points which we have discussed so far, I will be explaining how these points are getting utilized in the example project. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'm hoping that it will improve your knowledge about test automation framework. Thank you so much for watching. Have an excellent rest of your day. See you soon.